see young people out.
Are there chairs?
There's what's it called?
Bleachers.
Bleachers. Thank you. I didn't know what they were in my time. Do you? I don't think there's going to be many
I do
there.
what you do, but in our profession.
Do what now?
The announcing that you're doing as town announcer?
Uh-huh.
In the middle of the SCA, in the Middle Ages, they were called heralds.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I am.
She's like, oh, I'm the herald.
Well, I'll turn the bell over to you. I just volunteered for this. I'm not a bell ringer.
I don't normally need a bell.
Is it starting now?
She doesn't.
It started about 15 minutes. You'll be speaking, and I'll be speaking a little after.
Wonderful. I'll come over for both.
If you want to wander over there, I'll keep an eye on stuff.
I
Okay.
hear someone. I did not even see that man behind.
He's hiding.
We
from
have
the
people
sun.
hid everywhere.
I like that nice Templar thing in the background.
He's hiding from the glowing orb of death in the sky.
Yep. I've been getting toasty, so I decided to hide back here for a while.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Never heard his story. I'm pretty sure I'll get him to tell it a little bit later on. You don't have that old hat anymore, do you?
Got the old hat right here on my head. I didn't wear my new one.
Well, first time I saw this man, he was wearing blue uniform. I said, what the world is Robert E. Lee? And then I remember Robert E. Lee started out in the U.S. Army.
Exactly.
Well, this man right here, he'll tell you in his life story here in a little bit. Didn't even know who Robert E. Lee was. Well, he knew who he was, but he didn't know Robert E. Lee. And a woman looked at him when he was in the military and said, when's Robert E. Lee gonna talk? And he started researching his life. This man right here lives the life of Robert E. Lee. And when I first saw him in Montgomery, he gave me a visual living history in 40 minutes of the life of Robert E. Lee. And I've got a chance to know this man ever since, and the guy he's going to introduce I met about a year ago. He's a very young man, but he's got a head on his shoulders. And these young people that are in this hobby, I'm 40 years old. I'm not old, but I'm not young. These young guys, that's the future of our country. That's the future of Alabama, Kentucky, Virginia, Georgia. That's the future of our history. And the guy that he's going to introduce, he's a very well-read individual, and he knows his stuff. But this man right here has got a lot of stories to tell. So after he introduces Pete, maybe we can get him to talk a little bit about himself.
I've been known to drop my hat and talk about it for 30 minutes, so look out. Yeah.
And he's also been known to get pulled over too.
Yes, speeding tickets, yes. You know, what do you know about freedom? What do you really know about this thing we call freedom? And where did it begin? It began in the hearts of men and women. And today we are blessed to have a patriot with us that will share what it was like when our country was hesitating on the threshold of either sinking or swimming as a country. And without further ado, I met this young man a couple years ago. I was quite impressed with him, and the more I get to know him, the more impressed I am with him because of his genuine love of not just American history, but the true history of America. And that is what we do. And if you look around, you're seeing the remnants of a grand army, a grand revolution called the American Revolution. And unfortunately, even that's under attack today. We are the last vessels of truth and knowledge. And upon our shoulders bears that burden, nay, blessing of carrying it forth to the rising generation. And I'm tickled that this young man who I've seen portray President Davis, Pelham, that courageous, gallant Pelham, and now Peter the Patriot.
How's everybody doing today?
Fine, sir.
First, I'd like to thank you, all of you, for coming out today, this week. This is a speech that I composed about Memorial Day. Lexington Green, Massachusetts, April 19th, 1775. The militia of the town gathered together ready, with arms, in defense of their families, homes, rights, and stored munitions from the oncoming British troops. John Parker, the commander of the militia, told his men to stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have war, let it begin here. In the distance, they could hear the marching of the oncoming British troops. The commander of the British soldiers told them to lay down their arms and disperse, but they stood their ground. All of a sudden, a shot rang out, causing the British soldiers to open fire on the militia without official order, killing 8. Nobody knows even to this day who fired that shot that started the Revolutionary War. The shot heard round the world, as it is called. For up to this point in history, no other nation has fought the empire of Great Britain. Later the same day, both sides regathered at the Old North Bridge in Concord, where the official orders were given to fire upon each other. Noah Webster's school book, from the year 1807, states this in the chapter titled, "A Sketch of the Late War in America." Here was spilt the first blood in the late war, a war which severed America from the British Empire. Lexington opened the first scene of the great drama, which in its progress exhibited the most illustrious characters and events, and closed with a revolution equally glorious for the actors and important in its consequences to the human race. 93 Americans were lost that spring day, with 273 British soldiers lost. The war would continue on for the next 6.5 years. Nathan Hale, 21 years old, a prominent, honest young man who started his career at a grammar school in New London, Connecticut. War had already broke out. Thus he had a great decision to make: continue in his career choice or join the Continental Army. He joined the Army and eventually rose to the rank, or eventually accepted the command of a company in the country's first Special Forces unit, the New England Rangers. General Washington was in desperate need of gaining intelligence of how the British were making their moves. Though Hale lacked in spying skills, he volunteered to spy on the British. He disguised himself as a schoolmaster. Even with Manhattan being invaded by British forces, he stayed to gain more intelligence. When he left about a week later to bring the information he gathered, the British captured him. For spying at this time was a punishable offense by hanging. British General Howe sentenced him to hang the next day on September 22nd of 1776. Hale was denied given a Bible and to speak to a clergyman, which enraged the Americans. Nathan Hale's famous last words, as the British executioners were preparing the gallows, were, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Here's an excerpt from a letter written by Surgeon Albigence Waldo of the Connecticut line, dated December 17th of 1777, Valley Forge. The Army are poorly supplied with provisions, and occasionally it is said the neglect of commissary of purchases. Much talk among officers about discharges. Money has become too little consequence. The Congress has not made their commission valuable enough. Heaven avert the bad consequences of these things. Our brethren who are unfortunately prisoners in Philadelphia met with the most savage and inhumane treatments that barbarians are capable of inflicting. Our enemies do not knock them in the head, or burn them with torches to death, or flay them alive, or gradually dismember them, which is customary among savages and barbarians. No, they are far worse, by far. They suffer them to starve, to linger out their lives in extreme hunger. One of the poor, unhappy men drove to the last extreme of the rage of hunger, ate his own fingers, up to the first joint from the hand, before he died. Others ate clay, the lime, the stones of the prison walls. Several who died in the yard had pieces of bark, wood, and clay and stones in their mouths, which the ravings of hunger had caused them to take in for food in the last agonies of life. These are thy mercies, O Britain. The Revolutionary War would continue on to the closing battle of Yorktown, Virginia, October 19th of 1781. General Washington would lead the Continental Army to victory with the help of our oldest ally, the French. The American Revolution, in my opinion, has displayed patriotism to its most absolute perfection. Why? Because the men of the Revolution, with the signers of the Declaration of Independence, held true to the last sentence of the Declaration, being, and for the support of this Declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They set the example for future Americans in both times of war and peace. America, just being a new nation, already had its next enemy, the Muslim pirates of North Africa, referred to as the Barbary Coast. France and Britain were paying these pirates annual tributes so they may be granted their passage into the Mediterranean to do trading with their merchant ships. America paid these tributes for a small time so they may trade as well with their merchant ships. But this purchased peace did not last long with the pirates, for it was a one-way deal. Americans on the ships were often taken captive unless a ransom was paid and used as slaves and tortured. They would be forced to wear little clothing, so they may be torched by the desert sun's intense rays. Tensions escalated to war with the Barbary nations, with Thomas Jefferson as president. Though there are many more details to this war that I would encourage you to study, I would like to include this particular battle, August 3rd of 1804. The American Navy engaged the pirate ships at Tripoli Harbor. Stephen and James Decatur were brothers and captains on separate U.S. Navy gunboats. The battle was turning out quite well for the Americans by fighting the enemy at point-blank range with the marine musketry and deadly grape shot. Stephen Decatur, the older brother, and his men boarded an enemy ship, and in 10 bloody minutes, they had killed or wounded more than half of the pirates' crew and successfully captured the ship. James Decatur's ship was preparing to board another enemy ship after it had received heavy American fire, but the enemy surrendered the ship. James Decatur, stepping on board the enemy vessel, was then savagely shot in the forehead by a Tripolitan pirate. James fell into the sea between the two ships. The Navy crew managed to bring him back on the deck of the ship, while the cowardly pirates fled to the harbor of Tripoli. James was hovering between life and death. Stephen Decatur's happiness of the victory he had recently won would be rapidly replaced with fury and vengeance to bring that pirate to justice by death. With a small crew of 11 men, they pursued the enemy ship and boarded the ship, bringing the Muslim pirates the only form of American diplomacy they would ever recognize, that being by sword. Stephen Decatur was able to single out the pirate captain who killed his brother with his muscular build and height. Stephen Decatur, armed with a pike, thrusted it towards the pirate, who managed to grapple it away from Decatur, and him, Decatur, merely being stabbed by it himself. The two then wrestled on the ground. Another pirate, who saw them fighting, had drawn his sword to cut Decatur's head. Daniel Fraser, a U.S. sailor previously wounded, stepped out in front of the blade, taking the blow to his own head. Decatur, with the pirate captain's knife to his throat he had managed to stop in time, he then grabs for his pistol in his pocket and shot the pirate, bringing him to his death. They had won the day, but with the great loss of James Decatur only in his early 20s. Daniel Fraser, however, would live on. America made their point clear, wanting freedom from a tyrannical government during the Revolution, and freedom to trade to foreign nations without the threat of pirates. Now America had to preserve itself as its own nation that would yet again have war with Great Britain. Trade rights, naval blockades, the searching and seizing of U.S. ships and sailors were part of the reasons why America declared war on Britain. The spirit and dexterity of the American troops were tried heavily in the first 2 years of the War of 1812. For the first time in U.S. history, the enemy forces took over the U.S. Capitol at Washington, D.C. by burning the presidential mansion, the Capitol building, and others. But the men at Fort McHenry would see the worst yet. Fort McHenry, Baltimore, Maryland, protected a key harbor that the British desired very much so they could isolate the northeastern states from the southern. The British Navy, with 19 ships, started the bombardment of Fort McHenry in the early morning of September 13th, 1814. Fighting went on through the night, with the townspeople watching this intense battle by rooftop, and it continued into the next day. Over 1,500 enemy cannonballs, rockets, and shells were fired. Francis Scott Key was negotiating a release of a friend from one of the British warships when the battle broke out. The British temporarily held him captive on board. Here, he penned the famous poem that was the eyewitness description of the battle. "Oh, say can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free, the home of the brave." Commitment would describe the men at Fort McHenry precisely, for if they gave up the fort, it would have changed the war entirely. Instead, by the dawn's early light, the flag was still there. The British recognized their defeat by the Star-Spangled Banner flying high and proud over Fort McHenry. The Americans won the battle by their true display of bravery, commitment, and patriotism. For the War of 1812 would come to a close at the Battle of New Orleans, January 8, 1815, though it was fought after the Treaty of Ghent was made. Since the opening shots of the Revolutionary War at Lexington Green, to fighting the Islamic pirates of the high seas, and to the closing Battle of New Orleans, there has been many more hundreds of thousands of lives lost in the defense and preservation of our rights and America during war. For instance, the Indian Wars, 1817 to 1898, the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and I would like to say this particularly about the Civil War. Perhaps as you've heard General Lee mention the gallant Pelham. Well, the gallant Pelham, John Pelham, was born in the Alexandria community in the year 1838. He was accepted at West Point Military Academy for its only 5-year course. Well, the war between the states broke out, and it came to a point where he had to either Simon Cameron, the Secretary of War, stated after April 12th, the bombardment at Fort Sumter there, said that all West Point cadets were to reaffirm their oath of allegiance to the United States of America. Well, John Pelham resigned, and he made his way back home to Alabama without getting his diploma, only 2 weeks away from graduation. He joined the Confederacy, and he rose to the rank of Major of the Mobile Artillery Unit underneath direct command of Brigadier General Jeb Stuart. But he wrote this letter to a relative of his after the Battle of Bull Run. This is his letter. He said, "I have seen what romancers call glorious war. I have seen it in all its phases. I have heard the booming of cannon and the more deadly rattle of musketry at a distance. I have seen it all nearby and have been under its destructive showers. I have seen men and horses fall thick and fast around me. I have seen our own men bloody and frightened and flying before the enemy. I have seen my own men bravely charge the enemy's lines and heard the shout of triumph as they carried their position. I have heard the agonizing shrieks of the wounded and dying. I've passed over the battlefield and have seen the mangled forms of men and horses in frightful abundance. Men without heads, men without arms, and others without legs. All this I have witnessed and more, till my heart sickens. And war is not glorious as novelists would have us believe. It is only when we are in the heat and the flush of the battle that it becomes fascinating and interesting. Major John Pelham's last battle will be at Kelly's Ford, Virginia, March 17th of 1863. Here he was on horseback when a Union artillery shell exploded, embedding his fragments into the back of his head. He tumbled to the ground being thought for dead, when he was actually unconscious. But the doctors who vigorously worked on him, it was too late. He had passed on at the age 24. Sorrow swelled in the Confederacy. Brigadier General Jeb Stuart said of his death that it was an irreparable loss to the Confederacy, generally referring to him as the gallant Pelham. Moving on, the Spanish-American War, 1898 through 1902, World War I, 1917 through 1918, World War II, 1941 through 1945, the Korean War, 1950 through 1953, the Vietnam War, 1964 through 1975, and I would like to say this about the Vietnam War. Prisoners of war, missing in action, you are never forgotten. Desert Storm, 1990 through 1991, Operation Enduring Freedom, October of 2001, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and the current global war on terror. Patrick Tillman from San Jose, California, was a star football player for the Arizona Cardinals NFL team. He was about to accept a multi-million-dollar contract with the Cardinals in the aftermath of the 9/11 Muslim terrorist attacks, bringing the worst terrorist attack in history. 3,000 men and women gone. Like heroes before, Patrick Tillman left his career, the contract, and joined the Army Rangers to fight the Islamists in their own land. It is sad to say, just being 27 years old, he lost his life due to friendly fire in the 2 years of his service. The late Patrick Tillman now has a school named after him in Phoenix, Arizona, called Pat Tillman Middle School. His story lives on with a teaching of the love that he had for this country, for that love is called patriotism. Patriotism is love of one's own country, the passion which aims to serve one's country, either in defending it from invasion or preserving its rights and maintaining its laws and institutions in vigor and purity. Patriotism is the characteristic of a good citizen, the noblest passion that animates a man in the character of a citizen. Patriotism, bravery, and commitment has remained the same in our military through our nation's wars. Taking a stand in the defense of our country in the military service means sacrifice. For freedom is never free. The estimated number of all U.S. military casualties from the opening shots of the Revolution on the Green Laurels of Lexington to today, a span of 244 years from the VA office, is 1,190,000 plus sacrifices. Arlington National Cemetery covers 624 acres with over 400,000 graves. 624 acres is the equivalent to 472.72 football fields. For this number is not even half of all war casualties. John chapter 15 verse 13 in the Bible says, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay his life down for his friends." The men and women of our nation's wars have willingly defended our unalienable rights endowed by our Creator, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, by the sacrifice of their own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Patriots may die, but patriotism never, or will it? Since the days of Patrick Henry's speech of "Give me liberty and give me death," to Thomas Paine's pamphlet titled "The American Crisis," stating, These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this time of crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he who stands it now deserves both the love and thanks of man and woman. To the daily opening in prayer in the Continental Congress leading up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, documenting the facts of our unalienable rights endowed by our Creator, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, America has changed from how these men knew it. There is a number that far exceeds that of all U.S. war casualties, beginning in 1973. 58 million, with an estimated 2,800 added every day. This is the number of the war on U.S. babies. This number is 49 times larger than all U.S. war casualties in only 1/5 of the time since 1775. America is killing itself. It would take over 20,000 football fields for the aborted to be buried. Put this in perspective. A grave plot typically measures 2.5 by 8 feet, with no space in between the graves of the aborted. It would cover 1.5 Calhoun counties, or 1,036 square miles, with an additional 1.5 football fields added every day. Imagine standing in the middle of our county, looking all around at nothing but the headstones of the aborted in every direction. Our military have fought and died for these children too, but they have been denied their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The very thing that all good governments are supposed to protect, for they had no say. Compare the 3,000 lives lost on 9/11 to those 2,800 abortions added every day. In this country, did either group die willingly? No, they did not. With this in mind, every day is a type of 9/11. Our military exists for the protection of all U.S. citizens, born and unborn, because of the constant threat of war from different enemies. But the innocent child of the womb is killed at the whim of their own mother. How truly sad and sickening this is, that our own government would support such. When morality and adherence to God's law is lost in the nation, this will surely bring destruction to America, far worse than what any other foreign nation can inflict. America is destroying itself from within. When the first unalienable right endowed by our Creator, being life, is denied, can we hope that liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and peace and prosperity will follow? And the blessings of the Lord? No, we cannot. We would only be deceiving ourselves. As citizens, I am asking you, will you preserve their rights at the voting booths for the unborn? The very rights that 1,190,000 plus servicemen have died for, so the aborted may enjoy them as we do? Where is the young generation that would love and cherish this country and set aside moral vices? Where is that older generation to be the example of maturity and purity, and to teach the young the stories of heroes who have fought and died underneath the stars and stripes for the preservation of this land, and be taught about salvation of Jesus Christ, the ultimate picture of love and sacrifice displayed on the cross? Will we be a God-fearing nation or a God-hating nation? Will patriotism thrive in the hearts of our nation's youth or become a thing of the past? Will babies continue to be killed, or will you stand like those in our government who are passing laws to protect the unborn? Will the lives of those hundreds of thousands of military servicemen be remembered for what they died for year-round, or forgotten? Will America, my nation, and your nation, become a thing of the past due to the rejection of God's moral law? Or will we remain as the land of the free and the home of the brave? Are you American because you were born in America? Or are you American because you would willingly die for America?
Outstanding.